Hi. Figure out my configuration here with the microphone. What are all of you doing? Actually, what right now are you doing? Like, are you sitting in a chair? Yeah. Are you like in an office in San Francisco, sitting in a chair, watching a talk? Are you on Twitter instead of watching a talk, sitting in a chair? I got really interested in this question of what am I doing now and what is it possible to be doing now? Because you're sitting in a chair in San Francisco, but you could be tapping on a podium, or you could be calling your mom, or you could be any number of things, and you're not right now. You've chosen to do this one thing. And I've gotten really fascinated with what's the list of every possible thing that I could be doing right now. And it's pretty hard to generate that list. I think it's actually an impossible task, but you can start. And so I started making these lists of just things that you can do. And however weird and crazy, just what could I be doing? And then I started thinking about some of these I would do, and some of them I wouldn't. And there's a reason for that. And what is the difference between the things that are in bounds for me and the things that are out of bounds? I might be someone who plays a guitar. And I think the reason why that's in bounds for me is because I define myself as the kind of person who would play guitar. That's something that is for me. But I could be someone who says no, that's not for me. I don't like the guitar. Similarly, I'm not the kind of person who pretends to be a Viking ghost or goes to church. Why is that? Why do I define myself such that those things are outside and the other things are inside? And I think that part of it is that once you choose an action, once you say I'm a guitar person, then that has implications. That means that you're more likely to join a band. You, with every action that you take, are carving out a subspace of all possible actions that you can live inside, and you're pushing away things in other subspaces. And so I got really fascinated with this, and I think that this is a really deep thing that we do as humans, is figure out what's our stuff and what's outside of us. And I think that our society, our culture, really reinforces that. It says, who are you? What is your purpose? What are you going to do next? You're at Subway, it's what do you want on your sandwich? Are you a Mac or a PC? Republican or Democrat? Which Sex and the City character are you actually? I took the quiz. Apparently, they say I'm a Samantha. I don't see it, but... And then so, I actually have a problem with this. And it might, you might not agree with me that this is a problem, but I think that it's a problem that once you define a set of things that is, in bounds for you, it gets rid of the other things. Because if I think about it, maybe my life would be better off if I spent my Saturdays pretending to be a Viking ghost. Maybe I would like being someone who went to church on Sunday. But it's very difficult to get from where I am to that other place. So the way I think about it in this terrible diagram is that when you choose a subset of action space, you're putting yourself into an attractor. You are sort of trapping yourself in a rut. And that makes things that are outside of that subspace really difficult to get to. You have to climb up that wall. It kind of puts you into a reality tunnel. And you see this a lot of places. When you are in the space of, here's a very direct example. The election in 2000, when was it? Trump. I was in San Francisco at the time, and there was a lot of people that were in the the reality tunnel where voting for Trump was not an option. Like, that was just like outside of the universe of possibilities. And then there were people crying in the streets when the results came in and a lot of people went the other way. And so I think there's like a lot of danger to getting sucked into this sort of tunnel where you are restricted from making certain actions. And I also think that technology is making it worse. This is not like a new idea, but the idea of like the filter bubble, that, you know, when you go on your Facebook news feed, you see things that reinforce your viewpoints and sort of get into an echo chamber, that sort of deal. I kind of buy into that. But I actually think that it's worse than that, because if you think about like the logic of a recommender system, the end goal of a recommender is to know you so well that you don't have to make a choice. That like, if the computer knows your preferences perfectly, then it already knows what you're gonna do. Like, it knows what the logical next step is, and so you are free from having any agency. And like, that really bothers me, because I think that it like conflicts with the idea of free will. And I think that we should demand that we have agency. We should push back against the idea that we can be predicted by a machine. Because if we don't, it's very easy to get into a place where you can be controlled by other people. So I worry about that. So yeah, in this diagram, like, the recommenders are sort of pushing you down into this subspace. They're reinforcing the identity that you have. And I think that like the tech industry is interested in this future because it makes a lot of sense financially. Like, advertising works a lot better when people are into certain categories. But it also is kind of what people want, and that's really the tricky thing about it, is that like, if you ask, what do you want to show up in your newsfeed, you don't want it to be like this weird other stuff. But so I think that you have to make sort of a counterintuitive turn in order to get out of this place where recommenders are sort of trapping you into a subspace of action space. Oh, this is like a kind of terrifying quote from Eric Schmidt. I actually think that most people don't want Google to answer their questions. They want Google to tell them what they're going to do next. And I think that's true. That's sort of like the logic of this system. So my solution to this, personally, was a little bit of a paradoxical one, which is that in order to free yourself from these sorts of preference loops, you actually have to submit completely to the will of the machine. You just need to forget what your preferences are and follow a computer system, but a random one that isn't biased in one particular way. And so this is a little bit like counterintuitive, so let's do a free association exercise here, and maybe this will help prove my point. But I'm going to say a word, and I want all of you to think of the first noun that comes into your mind when I say this word. I'll put it up on there too. So hold on to it, and then I'll ask you about it afterwards. Game. First noun. Okay, does anyone have a noun? Player? Rogue? Theory? Fun? Great. So how many of you thought of theory as your word? It's one. Cube? One. I can't remember what the others are. Player? I mean, quite a few player. Did any of you think of the Pittsburgh Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger, who plays the game football? Nobody. How about like big game hunting? No? What about Quit Playing Games With My Heart, the song by the Backstreet Boys? I didn't think of any of these either. But what's interesting about the way that computers work is that if you like made a comprehensive list of all the words and phrases related to game, all those things would show up in the list. Like, you could do a search query, and all those things would sit together. And so if you had like a big list of concepts, you could choose a random one, and it would be likely to be something that you didn't think of. It would be unconditioned by your thought process and the things that you did before. So it's sort of like a ladder out of that space. You know, if you're stuck in this subspace of actions, what if you just asked the computer for like some random action, and then that would push you onto a different path? So I got like really obsessed with this idea. I started trying to transform every part of my life to be randomized so that I could go into a different direction. I made a program that chose a random restaurant for me to go to, and every time I went to a restaurant, I would choose a random one. I started something called the Random Diet Club. It was a random elimination diet. And so once a week you would get something that's eliminated, and it was cumulative. And so you would eat no baguettes, and then no coffee, and then it just kept going on and on and on. There are a number of people in this room that were in the club. It was a real slog. But it does like change the way that you think about food, because you start having to avoid things, and it's interesting. I started randomizing my appearance. I don't do this anymore. I still have the tattoo, but it gave me a random tattoo from all of the internet. I got really lucky. It wasn't like something else. I got a soul patch, which was a weird look. I had it shipping me random shirts from Amazon. And eventually, I had it choose a random place for me to live. And so I made a big database of every flight fare and the cost of it, and figured out like what's within my budget, and then I chose a random one from that, and then would live wherever it told me to live for a couple of months, and then move on to the next place. And it sent me from places like Slovenia to Dubai and all sorts of other places in between, places that I never would have thought to go to if I was choosing based on my preferences. I did this for about 2 years. I was doing like freelance work in between to keep things going, but I was just trying to like randomize everything that I could possibly think of. And at this point, you might be wondering like, why am I here? Like, why roguelikes? And I think that like people that design roguelikes have the sorts of skills that are important for getting outside of these preference loops. Like, you all are experts in procedural generation. You know how to like make maps, how to statistically sample things. You are able to create realities within computers that are totally different and totally different every time you play them. And I would like to encourage you, hopefully inspire you, to apply those skills that you have to things that are outside of the screen. Like, figure out ways that you can use those techniques to shift your life into different subspaces of action space. So I'm going to walk through like a sort of a framework for how I think about these randomizers, and then a couple of examples of apps that I built that randomize different parts of my life. So the way that I think about how to build a randomizer is first you make a map of the thing that you want to randomize. So it could be a map of every city in the world, and then you choose a random one. Or it could be like a map of all of your friends, and then you call a random one of them, or something like that. So you make the big list, and then you throw a dart at the map, and that's, choose a random sample, probably uniform random, I think is the best way to go. And then you see what changes. Like, you take on whatever the computer gave to you, and you say, like, no matter what it is, barring some like ethical concerns, you do what the computer tells you, and then you see like, how did that change my life? And iterate. And it's interesting way to push yourself in different directions. So the first one I want to talk about is an app called Offbot. This was a random Google place generator. It's in the App Store. You press a button, and it gives you a random restaurant, business, bar, cafe in your area. And the way that I built this, it's really simple. Like, Google has an API to get names and information about places. So you just figure out all the places in San Francisco. There's a big list. And this is like all the businesses that Google knows about in San Francisco. And then you throw a dart. You choose a random one, and it says, you're going to Nails by Lisa. And then no matter what it chooses, and it has to be the first one, because you can get in this loop where you're like pressing again and again until you get the thing that you want. But whatever it chooses, as long as it's practical, you go there, and you see what happens. And sometimes it really changes things. One thing that I found is that like when I go to random places, random restaurants especially, like I'll be in my neighborhood and I'll be sent to a place that is on my route to work. It's like I pass by it every single day and I had never seen it before. Because once you've gone along a route to work or something a couple of times, you sort of block out things that aren't new. And so you might totally miss it. So there's a lot of times where I like discover something that I didn't realize was there. The other thing is I start to detect patterns in the noise. I think this is like a very human thing. Like even though it's totally random, it seems to have a meaning. And I'll give you an example of this. This is like a couple of years ago, I was going through a breakup, kind of. It was like a business breakup. Like I was working on a project with someone, and we decided we were going to end it. And so we decided, let's go somewhere random to discuss the end of this venture. And so I asked the computer where to go, and it sent us to Colma, just south of SF, to the Pet's Rest Pet Cemetery. Which I thought was amazing, like to put your project into the grave at the Pet's Rest Pet Cemetery. I found myself, Max, and ended up like going and talking to the proprietors of the place, and one thing led to another, and he said, you know, do you want to come see in the back? Because we've got some cremators here, and we've got a horse going right now. If you want to like check it out. And so like we walked into the back of this pet cemetery, and there's like smoke billowing out of a furnace, and the smell of it was awful. But like it was the perfect way to end this relationship. Here's another one. This is called the third party. It's sort of a way to sample social space. This was an app in the App Store until Facebook took it down in the Cambridge Analytica era. It was a way to choose a random Facebook event. So if you go onto Facebook, they have this list of events, and at the top there's the stuff that's for you, and that's what most people go to. But if you keep scrolling down, and you keep scrolling down like all the way down, there's all sorts of weird stuff at the bottom of the list. And so if you make like a comprehensive list of every event that's going on in San Francisco on a particular day, there's hundreds, sometimes thousands of events that are going on. And you choose one, it puts you into like a really different social space often than you're used to. I did this in Brooklyn, New York. It sent me to the Bushwick Public Library to something called a TNR event. Any of you know TNR? It's a trap, neuter, release, cat neutering event. There's a group of people that will capture feral cats and take them to be spayed or neutered. And I'm now certified. I can in the state of New York do this. It was a really well-attended workshop. I don't know if this is going to play. I don't think so. There's like fake cats that you put into cages, and it was really weird. I later did a variation on this where you take a traveling salesperson optimization with time windows and give it the list of events, and it will make an optimal schedule for you to go between random events so you can be at a random event all the time. Like 24 hours a day, you can be at someone's birthday party or like at the bar mitzvah or whatever. And I did this in Berlin, and it sent me all sorts of places. This is just like a sample of the places that I went. There was a children's puppet theater that had like a show about dinosaurs. And then it sent me to a taxi driver school to learn how to drive a truck. And then it sent me to an official conference by the German Ministry on Energy and something about solar energy with all these big wigs there. And then to a gay sex club, and then to a party after that. And Yeah, it was a weird day. There's this thing that happens when you go to like a whole bunch of Facebook events, is you start to get this sort of zoomed out view of like all of the events that are happening in the world on a particular day. Because if you go to like 10 Labor Day weekends, like cookouts or whatever, like 10 Christmas parties, then you realize like there are like thousands of Christmas parties. Like everybody's having like this sort of event at the same time, together in a way. And it's a pretty interesting thing to realize like the scale of social activity within a city. So that was one thing that was interesting. There's also this phenomenon of like, you go to like someone's birthday party or to like a club meeting or something that you would never go to otherwise, and you find your friends. Like, you realize I could be the sort of person that goes to this every week. And so it kind of gives you a sense that the path that you're taking through Action Space is just one of many, which is interesting. The final thing I want to talk about is sort of a new area of inquiry, and it's related to a lot of the things that Everest was talking about with language models and sampling kind of linguistic space, and it's still sort of new, but I want to talk through it with you guys to see if we can get anywhere with it. Let's see if this plays. Okay. Oh. I'm not sure if, okay, here we go. So I got really interested in how actions are embedded in language. So if you read a book, there's all sorts of things that the characters are doing, that people are doing. And if you want a map of action space, a lot of it, I think, exists inside of language. And so I wrote a program that reads books and reads blog posts and other things and pulls out all the actions and then builds a huge database, and I randomly sample it and print it out on this printer. And so it's sort of interesting. Here's the way that I went about this. Like, the initial experiment was I went onto Google and I typed in a phrase like, she went to the park and blank. And then you get like, okay, she went to the park and thought she was a tree. And the computer can recognize that. And then, oh, and I also went to WikiHow and all these other corpora. But the computer can recognize that phrase as this is a verb phrase. If you do something called a constituency parse, you can figure out like the structure of the sentence, and here's where the verb is. There's a bunch of packages that do this. The one I use is called Core NLP from Stanford. And if you pull out all the verb phrases, you get all of these like person does something sorts of ideas. And then you can take that and lemmatize it, which is like take the conjugated words and turn them into their root words. And you get like, go to the park and think she be a tree. And then you replace all of the pronouns with go to the park and think you are a tree. And so if you do this at scale, you can get like a pretty big group of actions. I'm also interested in the I'm also interested in these neural models. Like, I'm not super familiar with them yet, but I think there's a lot of potential. If you start an action sentence, we went to the park and, it can complete that, took out a bunch of garbage, and that's when it hit me that I was an atheist, something like that. I'm still haven't figured out how to do this yet, but I'm curious about it. So as I said, like, it's not super clear that this is working yet. I've produced a very large corpus of action words from books and blog posts and that sort of thing. And you can get printouts of all these actions. But when I read the actions, they don't really work. They don't really change the way that I think about things, because there's a lot of noise. There's like, I get the action meet a certain goal. It's super vague. Like, that doesn't work. Or like, do not get a direct response from Kobe Coetzee, who's like a South African politician. Or like, that doesn't really do much for me. And so there's like some conceptual piece that is missing, and I haven't like quite figured out how to filter this list yet. Let me know if you have any ideas. except there are like a couple of actions in this list that were pretty interesting and changed the way that I thought about things. I was testing out the printer and pulling out a bunch of different actions and kind of waiting until I got one that was doable, because a lot of them are just not actionable. And I got this one, which was a real shock. And I my first instinct was to throw it away. Like, no, that's not something I can do. But then I started thinking about it, like why is that not something that I can do? That's something that I'm physically capable of, but it's not something that I identify with. And then I started thinking about, like, I'm not a vegan. I eat meat. I may have eaten a deer at some point, but I feel bad about killing a deer. And so, like, by taking the computer seriously, I realized this sort of hypocrisy within my own framework of the world. And I think that, like, one of the things that these experiments have allowed me to do is really probe at, like, what are my values and what do I care about? Because I'm not the one that's choosing the action. And so I actually went on a hunting trip with a friend, and my plan was to get to the point where I have to pull the trigger and then decide, like, am I going to eat meat or not? But we never saw a deer. So work in progress, to be continued. And that's pretty much it. I'd like to encourage you all to try this out and think of some space of choice, some space of action inside of your life, and see how you can randomize it. Thanks.
We have time for a few questions. I'm going to pass the microphone back.
Hi, I'm just kind of curious, like, what was your approach to, like, showing up to these, like, events or something like that? I can just imagine, like, kind of showing up to an event and being like, oh, hey, I wouldn't normally be here. I'm just here because the computer told me to, This is
Yeah, I would try to avoid that. Like, just sort of, if I was going to another event that was, like, inside of my bubble or whatever, I wouldn't be like, oh, I saw this on Facebook, I don't know. And so I try to, like, take that stance. But then if it's clear that, like, I don't fit inside of this group, then I would ask permission, like, is it okay if I'm here? I'm doing this experiment, that sort of thing. And then sometimes they would say, no, like, this is not for you, and I wouldn't go. But yeah.
I'm just curious if you could sort of reflect on what Everest was saying about curation. It's almost like you're totally opposed to curation. Like, who are you if you're everybody? Like, if you're drawing from everything in the pool and just doing arbitrary things, then aren't you kind of nobody? Like, how does that, like, there's no curation, that's sort of the point, but at the same time, that is itself curation? I don't know, I was confused, so I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, I think the curation happens after the fact. Like, I see this as a step you do before you make that curatorial decision. You're sort of, like, expanding the set of possibilities, and then you say, like, oh, what just happened, and can I integrate that into my sense of self, or do I want to push it away?
Hey there, I was wondering how you chose what spaces of actions to randomize within your life, because it seems like, like going to a restaurant or going to an event is a fairly narrow set of, like, things to randomize. Can you talk about why that was a choice that you made to randomize that in particular?
Yeah, I had the constraint that whatever I chose should be easy. I didn't want to spend a lot of time building up this big system and not get experience with actually, like, trying it out. So, like, the Google Places API is available. Just try that out and quickly get some feedback. Or when things occurred to me, I'd be like, can I do that in a day? And then try it out.
Cool, thank you so much.
Thank you.